I learned about how you can be a historian by still keeping a close eye on literature, on art. At the end of the day, the fiction does not describe what actually happened.
Elizabeth, first of all, welcome back. It's been a while. A little happy to have you back. Elizabeth is back from summer vacation in the continent of Europe, and welcome back. We have a very special guest with us here today on the Jewish Link Pitch Meeting podcast. His name is Shay Pilnik. Okay, Shay is the director of the Emil and Jenny Fish Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Yeshiva University in New York. He also happens to be in our readership. He lives in Stanford. I cannot tell what his accent is. He's going to tell us what it is.
It's not northern Nebraska.
It's definitely not northern Nebraska, even though he spent time in Purdue, spent time in the Midwest, or so I guess the breadbasket of the country. Welcome, Shay.
It's my pleasure to be here. I actually spent time in the Midwest, in the breadbasket of the country, but never set foot at Purdue. Purdue University Press is the academic press that published my book.
Okay. So your PhD was from
the Jewish Theological Seminary.
Okay.
And I actually had the privilege of living in Manhattan. You know, that's the dream of a lot of Israelis.
You did
living in Manhattan for 2 years,
and you saw that it wasn't so great. Okay.
I don't know. This was maybe psychic. We never discussed it, but I'm married to a sociology professor. Oli Hauser is a sociology professor at Stern College.
Mm-hmm.
But we met at McGill University, and she got a job at the University of Wisconsin Oshkosh. And I, after 2 years in New York City. By the time I actually joined her in Oshkosh, I had only 1 month before my son was born. Don't ask me how that happened. And I raised both kids in Wisconsin. We actually started our life quite a journey in Oshkosh. Oli is the daughter of Israelis, but she's Canadian. We found our way to Milwaukee, a community of 25,000 Jews, which was a transformative experience in our life. Kids went to day school, and then I moved to Milwaukee to become the head of the Nathan and Esther Peltz Holocaust Education Resource Center. Another transformative experience in my life. I was the director of the center for close to 5 years. And at some point, I found out that there's an opportunity that cannot be missed to move from the regional to the national, maybe even international level, and make a real impact in the field of Holocaust education. I actually, when I left Manhattan after 2 years of required residency at JTS on 122nd Street, I made the pledge that I will never be back in Manhattan, in New York, in the tri-state. It was too crowded. You mentioned the Midwest and the breadbasket, and I'm thinking about all the corn and soy fields, soybean fields. But I came back, and then I learned when I was interviewing, I expressed a fear. My wife said, "I'm willing to move with you, but you're not putting me in a box." And then one of my colleagues, future colleagues, asked me if I've heard of Connecticut. I said, "Not really. Never been really to Connecticut." When we came to Stanford, it was just love on first sight. We came in August of 2020. So in a couple of days, it will actually be 5 years.
In the middle of COVID.
Right. Yes, I remember.
In the middle of COVID.
You were hired during COVID, the summer of COVID, right?
No, I was actually hired a couple of weeks before COVID. My first day was February 5th. The university was busy introducing the new kid on the block to everyone else. And a couple of weeks later, I was completely forgotten.
Right.
Everyone also went home. My home was in Milwaukee. So I spent the rest of the year until August working remotely from Milwaukee. Listen, we are all on a journey.
Hold on, you were the first director
I'm a few hundred miles closer to home.
So. You were the founding director of the...
I'm the founding director of the Emil and Jenny Fish Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies. By moving from Milwaukee to Stanford, I moved a few hundred miles closer to home. Home is Herzliya.
Okay. Is it still home, or is it just a figment?
It never changes. First of all, my classmate, childhood friend who grew up one floor above me became the mayor of Herzliya, which is quite a statement. My mom is deceased, but my father still lives in the same building. And some things, a lot of Israelis will tell you that they feel outside Israel like a fish that has jumped out of the water tank.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter the size of the water tank, but I've been blessed to, first of all, live in America, be a part of the Jewish community, and also play a leading role in it. Can't ask for more.
Is the plan, by the way, and I want to talk about the book, but is the plan to get back to Israel ultimately? Yeah.
When I chat with fellow Israelis, people who have been not so successful here and people who have been tremendously successful, one thing we agree about: we cannot imagine that this journey would end here.
Right.
It has to end there. At some point, God willing, I will tell you about Israel that I left when I was 26, and I've never felt for a moment at home anywhere outside Israel. And when people ask me, what does that mean? And I explain that when the plane lands in Ben Gurion, and the door opens and it's incredibly hot, violently hot, right? And you start to hear people yelling, maybe even pushing, and you walk into the bathroom at the airport and it doesn't seem as clean as it is, let's say, in a place like Wisconsin, public bathroom. But it doesn't matter, you're home. You're immediately home. Home cannot change. I can share with you an expression that my grandmother taught me in Belarusian, which is the language of the peasants. Takmili kutok, gdi atrezam pupok. And I will translate. And maybe that actually connects to the story of the book and my connection to the legacy of Eastern European Jewry. How dear to me is that tiny place, tiny in parentheses, stinky place, where my belly cord was cut off. In other words, the place where I was born. That aphorism, that expression, I carry anywhere I go.
Whenever I meet historians, I always like to ask. I thought about in academia also. So did Elizabeth. Did you think about academia or something?
Super briefly.
And thank God you forgot about it.
So I also thought about it. I'm short a doctorate in political economy from NYU. I never got it. I'm never going to get it. But I always, when I speak to someone like you, and by the way, I didn't tell you, my former YU employee I actually was a fundraiser for Revel, for the Revel Graduate School, and Azrieli also. And I love my Revel historians, and I like to ask, where did it come from? Where does especially if you're so connected to Israel, where did the love, the bug, the drive, the chush, so to speak, come for Eastern European history,
and the fortitude to see it through, to book-length manuscript.
The ability to move something like a book, it took 18 years from the paper I wrote to the book. The ability to move this project from A to Z is really in the hands of God. I would actually give more credit to my wife and to the extended family than to myself, because they could have told me a long time ago, forget about it. And actually, when I finished the dissertation, all I wanted is to be employed, to make an impact. I think that I am not the buried in the archive 8 hours a day type. So I felt very comfortable becoming a director of a non-for-profit center and not be an academic. It was almost like validation of the feeling of an ugly duckling that I had among academics. When I came to YU, I came with no expectation that I would publish the book. Then I started to meet colleagues. First and foremost, Dr. Steve Fine from Revel,
of course,
who
Steve.
said, "Let me read your dissertation." And after he took a quick look at it, I get another phone call, and he said, "Well, you don't really have to work on a book. You wrote a book already." So that was really the paradigmatic shift and point of departure. And from that moment on, it was just a matter of communication with, looking for presses, finding a home for it. You asked me about the drive to become a historian. I recall a conversation I had with my grandfather, Misha. I was 16. He passed away when I was 19. So this was like the last years that we spent together. He had a huge impact on me. He was a captain in the Pacific Ocean Fleet. And he actually served during World War II, not too far from Tokyo, near the port of Vladivostok. And I know very little about his own history. And I shared with him my desire to do something in the humanities. And he put his hand on my forehead. I'll never forget it. And then, he made the motion of getting burnt. Mm-hmm. And he said, "You must be really hot." And then I remember he told me, "Snap out of it." Business, law. So I really had to swim against the current in order to do it. My brother and I both graduated from the same high school, and that was the high school that prepped Israel. That was the early 90s. Israel's next generation in the tech world. My brother is the chief of R&D of a startup company. And I had a different direction. So I would say that the drive is extreme curiosity. My parents were born in Vilna. So first of all, my brother and I are the first Sabras in the family of our generation. We also have an uncle and aunt who were born in Israel, but it was still very fresh. And my grandparents everyone decided to speak to us in Hebrew. But they spoke among themselves in Yiddish. And when the Russian immigrants came in the 90s, the rest of the family, then they switched from Yiddish to Russian. I always had this love for the sound of Yiddish and Russian. Actually, Russian was the first language that I learned at the Hebrew University, and then later Yiddish at McGill University. I recovered in a way the linguistic background of the family. A few months ago, a daughter of Holocaust survivors ran into me at a hotel in Warsaw. And she told me that there's a metaphor I was not familiar with of a memorial candle in the family. And there's one child, one grandchild, who is the
keeps
one
it alive.
keeps the flame alive, to keep the legacy alive, to be the one to answer all the questions. My mother passed away a few years ago, a month after my grandmother passed away. And all of a sudden I realized that there's still questions, things we don't know, and all of a sudden there's hardly anyone to ask. So among all the siblings, I was the one to be most curious about the legacy. I think my Russian at some point became much better than my parents'. The knowledge of Russian literature, Yiddish literature, far greater than the rest of the family. My sister-in-law got the recipe for the gefilte fish, and I got the knowledge of languages. And with some of my grandparents, I actually had the pleasure of speaking with them in Russian, in Yiddish. When I got my first job in Holocaust studies, my grandmother called me up. She was by then already 90, and she took full credit for it. And I did not challenge her. She said, you grew up in our home, and your Holocaust education, the way also how I see it, started when I was very little.
Mm-hmm. But they were survivors, or they made it. They
were Holocaust survivors. I mentioned my grandfather, who was a Red Army officer. The rest of the family were survivors. One grandmother went through the camps, and the other grandparents were lucky. Long stories, but for my father's side, to flee the Nazis. And to be one in Uzbekistan, my grandfather in Russia during the war. They come to Vilna after the war. This is where my father is born and my mother is born. Both parents come from the same city, different sides of the city. And I also had the privilege of spending some time in Vilna back in 2020. My master's thesis was about the writer Chaim Grade, the Yiddish writer Chaim Grade, whose entire literary world, was a memorial, was a monument for the annihilated world of Lithuanian Jewry. And I think that this is where I started to think about literature as a memorial for the Holocaust. And and the poems, the stories, the symphony that I discuss in my new book, these are all literary memorials for the Holocaust in lieu of the monument that the Soviet government would not allow Jews to put up after World War II.
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent segue into your book, but I also can I parenthesize it by saying, were you a student of Ruth Weiss at McGill?
I was a student in a very spiritual way. She had big impact on the way I understand my role as a Jew in America and a Jew in the world. We Israelis grew up with vague sense of what it means to be Jewish, unless you grew up in the Dati, in the Dati community, and I was not. I grew up in a very secular family.
Masorti? No, not even. No, not.
Grandparents from my father's side, but I was a model chanich in the labor movement youth group, Oved Valomed. When I finished the military service, first thing I do is I pick up the phone call and apply for a job at a kibbutz. I lived for almost a year in kibbutz Kfar Upin in the Bet Shean Valley. And when I came to the Hebrew University, I picked a major in Jewish thought out of some curiosity. Again, this is something that's inner. It's within you. You cannot even explain it. And I will admit that first course, first day of school, introduction to the Talmud, and I do not even know what Talmud means.
Wow.
I saw some Talmud volumes, the Steinsaltz at my grandfather's house. I remember opening it and close to no education. So you asked me about Ruth Weiss. I was a student of her brother, David Roskis. So I have to say, politically, she helped me a lot, and we even once, twice had a couple of great conversations. But David Roskis and David Fishman, my mentors, history and literature.
How long were you in Montreal?
JCS.
How long you were in McGill, though? For how?
McGill University, by the way, Ruth Weiss by then was gone. I was there from 2003 to 2005. My mentor was Eugene Ornstein. Through the work with Eugene and then with the two Davids, David Fishman and David Roskis, I learned about how you can be a historian by still keeping a close eye on literature, on art. At the end of the day, the fiction does not describe what actually happened.
Right.
Here I deal with, in one of the chapters of the book, I deal with a documentary novel by Anatoly Kuznetsov called Babyn Yar, in which he insists that everything I'm going to say is what happened. And he is cited sometimes as a historical source, but it's a documentary novel. And when you write a novel, you always give yourself some license to create things, to create dialogues. That if you think about Schindler's List, for instance, it's a great example. Schindler's Ark, it's a novel. And there are dialogues,
from film.
Dialogues in the story and in the film where the person who wrote them, he could not be a fly on the wall to record the conversations. In a way, the world of literature in the last part of the 20th century became separated from history. We study literature per se. We study literary pieces. This is the legacy of formalism and structuralism. We study the novel by only looking at what it has within it. In the book, I showcase why this is sometimes wrong. In order to understand what's written, sometimes you need to know something about who wrote it, and why and where. You need context.
Right. So that's another great segue to your book, The Ravine of Memory. And this is a deep dive into the massacre at Babyn Yar, as I understand it. If not yet read it, looking forward to it. But as I think I mentioned the first time you and I ever spoke, which was, of course, I've heard of Babyn Yar, the subject of your PhD thesis, because I was a student of Yevgeny Yevtushenko in my freshman year of college.
You mentioned that to me in Oklahoma?
Yes. And he was he was there also his first year, and he stayed. He died in Oklahoma. He loved it. It was a great place for him to be creative, and he was welcomed, and he was a superstar there. And his performance art, basically, of this epic poem or whatever we're calling it, I don't even know what it wasn't just the words in it, but who he was and what he was able to accomplish, I guess, as a dissident, as an artist, as I don't even know if he was a leader in the artist movement or whether it was just a flashpoint or a touch point. But can you tell us about, I guess, start with Babyn Yar itself and tell us about what caused you to focus on it, to decide to focus on it?
Yeah, for most people, I think the word Babyn Yar would, not most people, but a lot of people would immediately, what would leap to mind is Yevgeny Yevtushenko. And when the name Yevgeny Yevtushenko, for those who recognize it, when they hear the name, the first place that comes to mind is Babyn Yar. So they will always be linked together. I met Yevgeny Yevtushenko once. He was at a conference. I did not arrange a meeting with him. I was a graduate student, very timid. Maybe I should have. If he reads the chapter about him in the book, I'm trying to be fair towards him, but in a way I feel relieved that he's no longer alive or around to
disagree with you,
disagree with me, or God forbid to sue me. My objective, this is like a teaser, but my objective in the book was to show how complex this legacy is, and how writing in the Soviet Union all fell at that time under the umbrella of what Professor Dina Speckler called the permitted dissent. These were people who disagreed with the Soviet regime, and they wanted to express their disagreement publicly by writing, for instance, a provocative poem that would be published in a major journal. But remember, in the Soviet Union, all the means of production and all the means of cultural and literary production was in the hands of the Soviet regime. So in a way, this was a part of a negotiation where the Soviet government allowed citizens to disagree with itself. This happens after the death of Stalin in a very special period in Soviet history known as the thaw period, or the Khrushchev thaw. Nikita Khrushchev, the leader of the Soviet Union, was instrumental actually in creating this climate. He understood that Stalinism has to come to an end. We have to free people from gulags. Till then, the economy in the Soviet Union had all been based on slave labor from hundreds of thousands of people who were locked up in those prison camps. The Soviet regime was not happy with some of the criticism. But at the same time, the Soviet regime also fostered it, encouraged it. Yevgeny Yevtushenko comes to the United States in the 1960s. He is on a book tour. He is on a poetry reading tour in England, in the UK, in Europe, in the United States, and in a way plays the role of a cultural diplomat. He leaves the Soviet Union as a diplomat to speak about anti-Semitism, the reason why Babyn Yar was not commemorated. And I think that if anyone wants to understand the full story, they'll still have to read the book. But Babyn Yar, from 1941 until 1966, there was no memory marker at the side whatsoever.
The massacre occurred when? Occurred in
41. It was 36 hours. It's the most rapid massacre in the entire Holocaust.
100,000
It was
people,
actually
more.
The German reports for those 36 hours spoke about 33,000 people. We believe that it was more. There's still a debate among historians.
It's just one pit. What's the physical size of Babyn Yar?
Babyn Yar is a huge ravine. It's a huge ravine. It's actually an expansive site. It used to be outside Kiev. Later, it had been absorbed by the greater Kiev municipality. Shootings took place in Babyn Yar in different stages of the war, beginning actually right after the Nazis invade Kiev on June 19th, 1941. And in September 29th, on Yom Kippur, they march the entire Jewish community. This is the first city that has a Judenrein community. And this is the very first city that becomes Judenrein in World War II, major city in Europe. And this is really the moment that marks the turning of the final solution from an attempt to expel European Jews to a clear program of mass murder and mass destruction. My story, interestingly, is about anti-Semitism. It's even about anti-Semitism, the kind of anti-Semitism that's very relevant today. But curiously, not so much about Nazi anti-Semitism. I begin the book by establishing the facts, explaining what happened at Babyn Yar. But most of the book talks about anti-Semitism not coming from the far right, namely the Nazi party, but rather from the far left, from the Communist Party. It's a story, Babyn Yar is a story of a double murder. The first murder is the actual murder of the Jews. The second is the murder of their memory, and that's the focal point of my book.
Wow. It's just it's so intense in this day and age when the word genocide is being bandied around in the same sentence as Gaza, that the very word genocide, which was coined by a Polish person Polish Jew in like 1941-42, the very word that is being used to describe a massacre, a marched city of Jews marched to Babyn Yar and systematically shot and left, and then covered over and forgotten, is being bandied around. This term is being bandied around as something else, as something associated with wartime casualties, which is no less bad, but also the very idea of we are killing you because of what you are, not because of what you did or not because of your crime, but because you are not convenient for us to be. We do not want you here.
The mind-boggling story of Soviet anti-Semitism is that this is not an attempt to kill the Jews. The Jews had already been killed, but it's the attempt to let them, to kill any effort, Jewish effort, to have that memory established, affirmed, talked about.
It's really interesting
Soviets
because
do not kill Jews. They do not. In their history, there's certainly been an attack against some Jews. Doctors were Jewish. The leaders of Soviet Jewish culture, in what is known as the Black Years of Soviet Jewry. It's interesting that the Black Years of Soviet Jewry are not the years of the Holocaust. They're actually, it's a time period of 1948 to 1952. This is an attack against Jewish identity. It's against Jewish religion. It's against Jewish presence in the public sphere. Because for the Soviets, there is nothing material to gain from not letting the Jews of Kiev to put up a memorial there. And even in 1976, when they finally do, they establish this mammoth slab, I don't know, off the top of my head, maybe 20, 30 feet tall, that makes no reference to Jews, but only to peaceful Soviet citizens. And due to protests from abroad, they added a plaque in Yiddish to that memorial, where the plaque in Yiddish says nothing about Jews. So you really see that, and I discuss it at length in the book, why the Soviet regime had, why couldn't it, they were after all the enemies of the Nazis, the arch enemies of the Nazis. And what's wrong with them? Why can't they let the victims admit and reflect, and publicly state what happened? You talked about genocide, but this is another analogy.
What's the quick answer, by the way? Just what's the so give us the quick answer. Why couldn't they?
Because I think that anti-Semitism is there, and it needs an outlet, and it needs a way to be channeled out. I actually explained it to a group of public school teachers in Florida a couple of months ago when I was at the workshop. For the far right, there's a clear channel in the 20th century, but also in the 21st century, to express anti-Semitism. Jews they belong to an inferior race, they control the economy, they're dangerous. You can say that Jews are, they killed God, etc., etc. From the left, this could not be done because anti-Semitism is denied in the Soviet Union. That's important to know. Lenin believed, and followed him, Stalin and Khrushchev, that the October Revolution and the establishment of the Soviet Union has already done away with all these old bourgeois social problems. So we really live in a society in which everyone is welcome, and that's why the Jew as an individual has to be welcome. So the outlet cannot be
Judaism.
cannot be the Jew. Then it has to be closure of synagogues and a war against Hebrew. And then in the 1960s, and this actually interestingly happens before the Six-Day War, an attack against Israel, which stands to represent the Jewish identity as a collective, in the form of a collective,
Also socialism.
of a collective identity.
Yeah.
The young men and women, if you can show the cover of the book, who put together a spontaneous commemoration meeting, it's called in Russian, to commemorate the 25th anniversary of Babyn Yar. You see the poster at the top. This was not done by a graphic design company. It was done by a group of young kids. One of them I had a chance to speak to, and also to quote his work. Emmanuel or Amik Diamant spoke about the fact that as a young kid in Kiev, a young Jewish kid, all he knew about Judaism came down to Babyn Yar. He knew that he's Jewish. He knew Babyn Yar. He didn't know anything else. And after that demonstration, which ended up with commemoration / demonstration, which ended up with KGB agents dispersing it, they read on the news that this was a dangerous Zionist conspiracy. And Diamant really said something shocking, but I think so timely today. They did not even know what Zionism means. And they thought that their goal of putting up a memorial in Babyn Yar, having commemorations on site, would be a way of improving life in their own home in the Soviet Union. Then when they realized that they are being branded and accused of Zionism and what it means, that's actually what led Diamant and his friends to make Aliyah and to move to Israel. In other words, the recognition that this place is not their home. A lot of the anti-Semitism, Jew hatred that is now geared towards towards Israel is projected onto Israel, including, by the way, accusations of genocide that for sure you can find them in the Soviet press. Back then it was the PLO who was very close with Moscow. The playbook for anti-Semitism from the West comes from this interaction between the Soviet government after in the thaw period and beyond, and even earlier, and Soviet Jews.
Right. Einat Wilf speaks about this, that the initial anti-Semitism from the left started with post-war Russia, this post-war Soviet Union, saying we're not against Judaism. Jews are welcome. You just can't practice your religion, and you can't be a Zionist.
The war against Zionism, when you say post-war, this is post-World War I. Early on in the history of the Soviet Union, there is an attack. There is an attack against rabbis, against Jewish institutions, against synagogues. This is a chapter in history that we Jews often like to forget, because the attack is done by Jews, the members of the Jewish section of the Soviet Party, or the Yevsektia. They actually come to the Soviet regime who are pretty clueless about Judaism, and they tell them that Yiddish is a kosher language of the proletariat, the Jewish proletariat, the Jewish working masses, but Hebrew, in their mind, is a bourgeois Jewish language, and that's why it has to be wiped out. According to Soviet dogma, there is room for Jews. That Stalin even allowed Jews to establish not a republic, but rather a Jewish autonomous region in Birobidzhan, which is in the far east of Russia. This is another chapter that we prefer to forget. But Stalin and Lenin, following their own Marxist dogma, viewed Soviet Jews as a people, as a nation, detached from the rest of world Jewry. Jews as a people linked to Eretz Israel, to Torah, that was just seen as a vestige of the past that would die out. They also believed that intermarriage and assimilation from their eyes would take care of it. This goes back to Babyn Yar by Yevgeny Yevtushenko. I mentioned the fact that he was a complicated figure because he goes to the West to both decry anti-Semitism and also claim that, look, they sent me here, so things are not that bad.
It's a very complicated figure.
But Yevgeny Yevtushenko in the poem had the guts to talk about Babyn Yar and Jews, talk about Anne Frank, talk about Alfred Dreyfus. Look at the Jews as a people and not as a sect like Uzbeks who happen to live in Russia or the Bashkirs or the Ukrainians, but really look at them as a people that has historical links that go back. He doesn't mention Eretz Israel, but he actually speaks about the time-honored history of the Jewish people and also make a link between Jews around the world. By the way, without that link, there's also no Shoah and no Holocaust, right? We can only talk about the murder of Jews in our country. That's another important point. In the Soviet Union, there is no Shoah. And, I teach Holocaust studies. So one of the main principles, like foundational pieces of knowledge that I have to instill in the students is that Holocaust is an American term, it's a Western term, Shoah is an Israeli term, but in the Soviet Union there is only one great patriotic war. The Great Patriotic War is that war in which 27 million Soviet citizens, including civilians and soldiers, were killed. This was such a catastrophic experience for the Soviet people that any other narrative that could overshadow it, was seen as danger, something that would deflect attention from the suffering of everyone to a particular group. So that's also an answer to the question we raised before. Why did they care so much about not allowing Jews to commemorate the Holocaust in the Soviet Union? In some places, by the way, they do, but Babyn Yar is the symbol. Babyn Yar is the focal point, and they say no. They say no. The first time there is a monument, a Jewish monument, memorial, the menorah, at Babyn Yar, that happens in 1991, only after the fall of the Soviet Union. So for them, for the Soviets, beyond Soviet anti-Semitism, there is a lot of anxiety about giving away, in a way, the war to any other group. And I mentioned anti-Semitism, and of course, not to the Jewish people. It almost felt to them as if the Jews are going to steal that too from us.
Do you see now that Kiev is now Ukrainian? Did the Ukrainians try to do anything? Has Ukraine tried to put its own stamp on it, or?
They made huge progress in Ukraine by establishing the Babyn Yar Memorial Center. By the way, Babyn Yar, I speak about Babyn Yar and Babyn Yar interchangeably. Babyn Yar is in Yiddish, in Hebrew, and in Russian, so I'm used to saying Babyn Yar. The site itself is Babyn Yar in Ukraine. In Ukraine, there was a plan before the war. They actually already started to build it, to create the largest Holocaust museum in Europe. A center that would have an archive, research.
Right by Babyn Yar.
Right by Babyn Yar. And in a way, the war nipped this project in the bud. And we don't know, this was also, by the way, a Ukrainian project funded by Russian oligarchs. The Ukrainian government's reaction to it was
mixed.
Was mixed in a way, although Volodymyr Zelensky came to the big inauguration of the project. There's so much that you can cull from the book. In Ukraine, you find today tremendous interest in Jewish history, Holocaust history, support for Israel, but you also find Ukrainian nationalism. You find Ukrainian nationalism
for obvious reasons,
appearing also as neo-Nazi sympathism. You find anti-Semitism. This is it's certainly a bitter legacy, and the way I conclude the book, again, no spoilers, is really the hope that through our educational efforts and by learning about the past, we can still be optimistic against all odds and build a better future, which is really the whole, I would say, edifice, what the edifice of Holocaust education is for. You mentioned your background in development, in fundraising.
Yeah.
When I speak to potential donors of the Free Center, I always, I have to begin with an apologetic note that I don't think Holocaust education is going to destroy anti-Semitism once and forever in this country or any other country. Today, a lot of Holocaust museums are blamed for, the work that they have not done. If there's so much anti-Semitism in America,
They're not doing their job.
we weren't even aware of. Truth to be told, as I like to say, the cost of our entire project is probably a fraction of the fraction of the cost of one bomb, and one lesson that the Jewish people had to learn after the Holocaust is that we have to defend ourselves. We need to have a state, we need to have an army, but education is a flame that keeps us, I think, alive. It is a home for our hopes. And in my experience, by the way, interacting with students, there are some minds that you change. Not all minds, not all people,
But some.
but some. And I think we should not, at least that's my take, should never spare any effort educating about what happened to ourselves, and also be the emissaries and carry the message to the greater community.
Shai, thank you. I switching to the personal. I don't mean to put you on the spot. I did not realize that you grew up with a non-Dati background. So I have to ask. So how did you end up in the Israel of Stanford? Is my question. So from how did you end up in the Dati world?
I always one of my mentors and rabbis told me that Baal Tshuva or Chozer B'Tshuva is a misnomer. That you don't become someone else. And Oli and I went through the process also in our 40s, not as kids. So we did not leave behind our families, our education. Maybe this is a segue to a much, much bigger conversation, but I really see the life I live right now as the culmination of my education. And I think that when I look back at the secular education in Israel and especially the education in the youth group, I think that the question of our relationship with Judaism was never really resolved for me. So we used to say in the youth group that Judaism for us Torah is a source of inspiration, but not a source of authority. And I think that a lot of Jews in our community would not necessarily follow every single thing that Shulchan Aruch says, every single thing, right?
Of course.
As a dictate and a source of authority. But I think that you cannot be inspired if you don't know anything. You cannot be inspired by davening if you don't know how to daven. You cannot be inspired by Shabbos, by the holidays, if you've never really experienced them. So to me, I say in America that I experience 2 days of the week, Saturday and Shabbos. And Saturday is just a day. It's the most mundane. It looks exactly like Sunday. But Shabbos is a stay in paradise for 25 hours. So when Oli and I moved in that direction, and I'm not so sure that in our family, when I think about my kids, my wife, the dog, we're all on the same page. But when we moved in that direction, we just felt that, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But also what makes you feel good, what makes you feel happy, you should. I don't look back at. I don't think that my friends from Herzliya who grew up with me, they are misguided or they are wrong. And as I said, it's still a big part of who I am. But you can't really be be Jewish, and maybe this is a mistake that the secular state of Israel created, and I don't think it was by design to have sabras, Israelis, who live a life with almost no knowledge at all of Yiddishkeit.
The answer is I think that the feeling is it was by design, that the secular Zionists knew what they were doing, that they replaced the state of Israel, the Medina. The Torah was replaced by the Medina. But you grew up in that milieu, so to speak.
Can I give a quick pushback?
Yeah.
Small one. You're right, but it was done by people who knew a lot. My grandmother, for instance, I sometimes would think that she's a rebbetzin from everything she knew, because she grew up in a shtetl. Her parents were religious. The war broke out when she was 17. All my grandparents grew up in frum homes, and they were part of a big society that made the decision to break with it.
Yep.
But when you look at the next generation, you don't deal with agnostics and atheists as much as you deal with people who are just more clueless.
Right.
And I felt a calling within me to change that. But again, in my extended family, people have different approaches, and they're on different pages. The book, I think, can contain more than one page, but I'm very comfortable the page where I stand right now.
Okay.
Beautiful. And also we should commercialize this and say that the forward of this book is by Natan Sharansky.
Yes,
that's exciting.
Natan Sharansky graciously agreed to write the forward.
Yeah.
And the forward really exemplifies my scholarship in the life of one person. He talks about Babyn Yar, and he talks about his own. We talked about Jewish cluelessness.
Yeah.
Wow.
He spoke about his own Jewish cluelessness, that anything he knew growing up in Donetsk about Judaism, totaled that pit outside Donetsk, in which thousands of Jews from his own town had been killed.
Yeah.
So we're really looking forward to reading the book, and
that's my assignment.
Okay. Keeping all of your continued research in our minds, and wish you much success. Look forward to the next one and the next one after that.
Yeah. Yes.
And best of luck with the Study Center, and we hope to continue hearing good news.
Yeah, and I'm sure while you'll be sending us only good things as you as you get out there.
And I want to thank you for the hard work that you do. The Jewish Link is everywhere.
Love it.
I told you.
Okay, good.
As far as Stamford, Connecticut.
All right.
Yes. Stanford is our northern boundary. Though with the Greenwich and Fairfield and New Haven are on my case. But to extend there, I'm not so sure we're going to get there so fast, but we're working.
Stanford is great.
Yeah.
Amen.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us on the Jewish Link Pitch Meeting podcast. If you would like to participate or be in touch with us in any way, please email us at editor@jewishlink.news, and follow us and find our podcast wherever you find podcasts.